There he is.
Hari Bol Maharaj.
Namo Namah.
Hari Bol Maharaj.
Jai.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
So,
Oh,
well, before you start, I'll give a little introduction for those who are online now. Holiness Ynana Swami, very wonderful devotee, known him for many years. Some people, probably one or two people, might remember that he's been here before, but it was so long ago that almost everyone is new compared to that time.
I remember.
Yeah, Guatemala. I remember. I don't know if I want to embarrass you in front of everyone, but I remember Hridayananda Swami's answer to your question.
Yes, I remember that too very clearly. And I think he's the only one who clearly answered that question for me.
what was the question?
The question was, I think it was something about the Christians, why they are so much against Hare Krishnas or something. And you said they're suddenly seeing some opposition, which they never did before.
Huh.
That was your answer, I think.
Actually, I'm going to say more on that topic. Not exactly just their attitude toward us, but in general, yeah, we're going to revisit that a little bit.
Okay, that would be nice. Thank you.
Anyway, Maharaj, I have a lot of respect for Maharaj because he's one of the senior devotees I've known for many, many years. He came to Boston when I was a relatively new devotee, probably 72 maybe. You came to, this is when you were sannyasi, came to Boston.
Yeah, the good old days when I was a sannyasi.
I meant that you were already a sannyasi when you came there. English is my second language. No, it was you already had taken sannyas and you were traveling around. And why I remember questions from then that you answered. And I remember one person was saying, why is it everybody, here, you're always collecting money for, trying to get money. You said, well, they're giving out literatures, and they were giving out Back to God magazines, and they asked for a quarter. And you said, any gentleman has a quarter. And he said, well, I'm not a gentleman. And you said, well, better late than never. Anyway, I'm sorry I'm getting into all this, but I remember these things very, very clearly. And anyway, one of my favorite sannyasis, I think one of the main, very nice thing about you is you have a really good sense of humor, and I really appreciate that a lot. You know Sanskrit, you graduated from Harvard or PhD in Sanskrit, religious studies, and you're very qualified. I like when you give classes and you have a verse and you dissect the verse, the Sanskrit, and it's so nice. You make everything very interesting. So I'm very happy that you're here to give us a talk or a lecture on something to do with Krishna consciousness. I'm not sure what it is.
Yeah, it's going to be vaguely related to Krishna consciousness.
Anyway, I don't want to take any more time. Thank you so much, Maharaj, for doing this.
Thank you, Pyari, for the very kind welcome. And Pyari is, of course, an old friend of mine. And yeah, for many, many years. And I'm happy to be able to spend some time with all of you. So because we live in a time, excuse me, that's not a smoker's hack, by the way.
I'm gonna mute myself because you're gonna hear me. Maharaj, you gave a class in Massachusetts at it was in Western Mass, not at the temple. And I thought it was great. I listened to it later on, and all I hear is me laughing. And it's like, I'm the only one laughing.
Well, you're the smartest one in the crowd because you got the.
Anyway, I'm going to mute this so you don't hear me laughing anymore.
Okay. So thank you again very much, and happy to spend time with all of you. As we know, we're living in very conflicted times. There's a lot of social, political division in the country, even moral division. And Krishna actually explains why that's the case. Krishna explains why the societies or communities become sort of trapped in all this conflict. And so the verses I will focus on are Bhagavad Gita, chapter 18, verses 20, especially verses 20 through 21, where Krishna is describing jnanam, knowledge, but in this context, it means something like what we would call nowadays worldview, how you see the world. And then in verses 18, 30 through 32, Krishna talks about buddhi, or intelligence in the modes. So if you compare buddhi and jnana, intelligence and knowledge, the way Krishna is using these terms in the 18th chapter, it's something like what would be called in Western philosophy synthetic knowledge and analytic knowledge. Synthetic doesn't mean knowledge made out of nylon. It means, like in the sense of although we have to leave open that option, but synthetic in the sense of a synthesis, like the synthesis. And by the way, SYN in Sanskrit, in English, synthetic or synthesis or symbiotic, of course, comes from Sanskrit. That's just the Sanskrit SAM, sam, like Sankirtan, which means together kirtan. Sang in Sanskrit means together. And so from the Sanskrit sang, we have Greek sin, which they pronounce sun in ancient Sanskrit. So that's where we get words like synthesis. So the synthesis is the together thesis, when you bring everything together and see the big picture, or what we would call worldview. And then buddhi, as Krishna uses it, is analytic in the sense you break things down into their parts, like what is to be done, what's not to be done, and what is good and bad. So it's analyzing breaking things down into their different components. So we're going to look at how Krishna talks about jnana, knowledge, in the different modes. And I think this explanation will make it obvious what the trouble is nowadays. So in the mode of goodness, 18:20 in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Sarva bhuteshu jainaikam bhavam abhyayam ikshate. So avibhaktam vibhakteshu tad jnanam vidhi satvikam. So Krishna is saying that knowledge or that worldview which sees sarva bhuteshu, in all beings, literally, it is the knowledge by which, actually yena means it is the knowledge or the worldview by which one sees in all beings ekam bhavam, one reality or one state of being in the highest sense. Obviously, for example, if like right here we can see each other, if you're in a room, you can see perhaps a table, a chair, the different parts of, but here Krishna, of course, is talking about different people. So we're talking about different people. So right here, there are different people, but within all of us, this is what Krishna is saying, within all of us, there is an abhyayam bhavam, ekam. There is one eternal, unperishing, abhyayam reality, or one state of being, literally, bhavam, like one state of being, which of course is spiritual, is the soul. Krishna does not mean that we are all the same person or we are all the same spiritual blob or something. But what he's saying is that even though we are different persons, somehow the same spiritual essence that's within me, namely that I'm an eternal soul, is also within you. Essentially, we are all the same kind of thing. We are all eternal souls. And Krishna says, avibhaktam vibhakteshu, and that one spiritual reality that is in all of us is undivided in the divided, undivided among the divided things. So clearly we are vibhakta in the sense of we are divided. We are different people. We are different individual souls. So vibhakteshu, so among the divided, that's us. And yet within the divided, there is an undivided spiritual essence. And in that sense, we are all one, even as we are all individual. So, avibhaktam vibhakteshu, so Krishna says, tad jnanam vidhi, know that this worldview is in the mode of goodness. And then in contrast, we go down, both numerically and qualitatively, going down to the mode of passion, where Krishna says, pritagtvena tu tad jnanam, nana bhavan, pritagvidhan, beti, sarveshu bhuteshu tad jnanam vidhi rajasam. And know that worldview to be passionate, not virtuous, not in goodness, but in passion, when one sees in all beings, sarva veti sarveshu bhuteshu, one sees in all beings nana bhavan, many different states of being. In the mode of passion, because consciousness is becoming clouded.
Hare
I
Krishna.
think we have a runaway microphone there. Okay, all set? Okay, some of the microphones, as we know, are living entities, and so sometimes they act out. So, Krishna says, pritag tvena tu, so in the mode of goodness, someone obviously sees the variety of the world. There are different people in the world. There are different species, different genders, races, nationalities, ethnicities. And obviously in the mode of goodness, you see that. However, within all those varieties, you see there is one unperishing spiritual nature that unites us all. Now, in the mode of passion, a person, because their consciousness is becoming covered, is becoming opaque, they cannot see past the surface. They only see the surface. And on the surface, we are different. Different races, genders, ethnicities, different favorite baseball teams even, which is, you have to be very advanced to see past that, right? But anyway, so in the mode of goodness, you see all the differences, but you see beyond it. But in the mode of passion, you can't get beyond the surface. So if someone's a man and someone's a woman, they're just different. End of story. If they belong to different races, different cultures, different ethnicities, they're just different. And there's nothing beneath the surface that brings all these people together in complete spiritual unity. We also call this the bodily concept of life. You cannot see beyond the body. You cannot see beyond the surface. So in the mode of passion, rather than seeing ekam bhavam, one ultimate nature, one sees nana bhavan. One sees many different states of being, many different natures, pritag vidhan, and they are of separate kinds. In other words, you can't bring them, like all the campfire kumbaya singing in the world is not going to bring all these things together. Because ethnicities, different species, that there's no significant connection between, let's say, an animal and a human being. So I cannot kill humans, but I can kill animals because they have nothing to do with me. There's a complete breakdown of empathy at this point. And so that's in the mode of passion. Na na bhavan pritag vidhan. For example, this word pritag. Pritag means separate. And there are several verses in the Bhagavatam where you get the term pritag drishti. Drishti is like darshan, seeing. And so Prabhupada translates this separatist vision. And the Bhagavatam talks about a devotee that cannot see the unity of devotees and has a separatist vision, pritag drishti. So even someone that claims to be a devotee may fall victim to this inaccurate, passionate vision of the world. When Krishna is describing intelligence, buddhi, in the mode of passion, he says, ayathavit prajanati, which means literally, intelligence in passion understands things inaccurately. And the mode of ignorance is just a total write-off. I mean, they can hardly get out of bed in the morning. So, but in the mode of intelligence, ayatavat prajanati, people understand things inaccurately. And so now getting to our modern chaotic world, of course, as we know, I don't want to get into specific politics because I don't want to, sort of criticize the mentally deficient, the people who are running this country, but we want to have empathy for them and hope they can somehow be treated in the very near future. But so when you get people who are very strongly in the mode of passion, they see the world divided up into different groups, and they want to fight for their group and fight against the other groups, even if they're citizens of the same country. And so if we look at modern activities, we live in an age where the ethos, sort of like the spirit of the age, is basically collective narcissism. And therefore we get the narcissist in chief. And actually there's a connection. I'm just going to close the door here because some cars are going by, and I'm wearing these very stylish clothes, and by the way, it's all for sale. So, get your bids in. And anyway, just kidding. So, for example, sex, the so-called, sexual liberation movement, and all kinds of activities that were formerly and correctly considered degraded. Now, if someone is completely out of control, acting in a very bestial way, polluting the whole public atmosphere, if you notice that, then of course you are body shaming someone. Because you're body shaming them. So, or the idea here is that, the United States of self-esteem. So there's this whole big push for self-esteem. It's like everyone, we have to reach some less fortunate people that don't yet know they're perfect just the way they are. It's funny because, you'd think that life is meant to improve yourself. In fact, that used to be a common way of speaking in the early 1800s, where people would say, yes, I want to improve myself, which could mean learning a musical instrument or becoming a better person. But nowadays, there's this idea that even if someone is really a fool, you're perfect as you are. There's nothing wrong with you, even though you're really pathetic. But actually, there's nothing wrong with you. And so self-esteem, I mean, obviously, we don't want to shame people, although, you see, there's always two extremes. Do we really think it's a virtue to be shameless? I mean, don't we wish that people like Hitler or Stalin, who according to the Russian archives killed around 40 million people, some people think it's still think it's sexy to be a Marxist, even though they killed about 10 to 20 times more people than Hitler, which is one of the wonders of our age. So, I mean, when people do evil things, if someone shoots, let's say, a nonviolent citizen, a policeman kills a citizen, I mean, isn't that shameless? Don't we wish that person had a more developed sense of shame? Do we really think, is everyone really perfect as they are? Is it that no one should try to improve themselves? Isn't life meant to become a better person, to learn, to grow? And yet now in this kind of disgusting atmosphere we live in, where you know the worst thing can happen to somebody is not dismemberment or death, or you know, it's that someone do or say anything which may negatively impact their self-esteem. And so rather than, let's say, feeling good about yourself because you're actually a good person, because you're making good choices, because you're helping other people, because you're growing spiritually, you're cultivating virtue, now you feel good about yourself just because you exist. The mere fact that you exist means that you're basically perfect the way you are, unless you do certain things in which you're very imperfect. But I mean, the world is it's just so insane. It's so crazy. So in that mood of you can't shame anybody, so that people are free to become degraded, they're free to totally wallow in the bodily concept of life, no concept of a soul, no concept of a higher existence, no interest in why the world exists, how it exists, why we exist, what's the purpose of our life, what really is the soul. Just is very, very, so this is very passionate. So you get all this sex and and drugs and people just like absorbed in the body. And even the political discourse is that we're actually not allowed to see people just as people. We have to see them as, you know, somehow members of a body group. So someone has to be seen as a member of a racial group, or they can't just be seen as a person. And of course, this results in abuse. And then it results in, and then the response to the abuse can be a greater insistence on the bodily concept of life. And anyway, I won't go into all the details, but it's all this, it's this overwhelming passion and ignorance. And so when people are passionate, when people are promiscuous, when people cultivate pride rather than humility or moderation, when they cultivate just self-indulgence rather than moderation, you get this. I mean, Prabhupada, when he came to America in the 1960s, Prabhupada said that you know, there's just a lot of passion and ignorance here. I don't know what he would say now. Things were almost puritanical back then compared to now. And so it's all this passion. The result is that people cannot see beyond the body. People cannot see beyond the body. And therefore they see themselves as divided because, you know, some people, you know, saying you're racist, and then they respond to that by sort of, you know, demonizing anyone that disagrees with them, anyone that, you know, whether they're racist or not, that doesn't exactly repeat the dogma of a certain political group. And it's just everyone breaks down into these war camps. And of course, this is all material passion. Because when one is in material passion, people literally lose the power to see the oneness of everyone. They lose the power to see that. And I would like to suggest that there's a sense in which, I don't want to say all this, but a part of it, a pretty hefty chunk, to use vivid language, a pretty hefty chunk of this is coming from religious fanaticism. And I think it emanates from that, and I'll explain what I mean. There are actually people in the West, sometimes, especially Christians, are proud to say that, there are just three monotheistic traditions, which are Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, which of course is quite ignorant because Vaishnavism is a very powerful and very ancient monotheistic tradition. And I have to say that with the Trinity doctrine, it's not clear to me or a lot of philosophers that Trinitarian Christianity is actually monotheistic. But anyway, we won't get into that now. But the point I want to make is that there are really two kinds of monotheism. One I call philosophical monotheism, which was characteristic of some classical philosophical traditions in the Greco-Roman times, and certainly in India, especially the Vaishnava traditions, what I call philosophical monotheism. And to clarify that, on the other side is what I call tribal monotheism. Tribal monotheism. Tribalism is a certain, and I'm going to connect this to the problems in the country nowadays. Tribal monotheism is used in a sense which is mainly derogatory, meaning characterized by a tendency to form groups or by strong group loyalty. In other words, anyone that's not in our group is basically just kind of nothing or not important. And we're all of our loyalty. What's lacking is a strong sense of the common good, the public good, that even people of different religions or different races are still, they're all citizens or they're all souls and so on. And so there is a unity beyond the differences. And that's exactly what Krishna describes as jnanam in the mode of goodness, knowledge in the mode of goodness, where you see beyond the differences. But interestingly, tribal monotheism, where it's kind of like, my God can beat up your God, or I have the true religion and you have the false religion. I worship the living God, you worship a dead deity, or something like that. You can see some of this stuff on Sunday morning for your own amusement, but so it's this fanatical approach. Now, what's interesting is that philosophical monotheism is based on philosophy. And the nature of philosophy is that you deal with universal categories. Like, for example, if you talk about, let's say, the divinely empowered messenger of God, that's a philosophical or theological category. And you could put Jesus there. You could even put Buddha there if you know Buddhism well enough. Certainly you would put Judaism there, the Hebrew prophets, or Islam, and Vaishnavism. For example, we talk about Shakti Avesh avatars. Avatars, people who literally descend to this world, and they are invested with the power of God. And there's an old Greek word which indicates that, of receiving the power of God. And the Greek word, of course, is charisma, spelled with a K. So a charismatic leader in the sociological or Greco-Roman sense means a leader perceived by the followers to sort of incarnate or possess special empowerment from God. And so if you talk philosophically about a charismatic leader or a Shakti Avesh avatar, then it's a category in which many things can fit legitimately. And so you can talk about religion, you can talk about representatives of God, or even talk about God in a philosophical sense, which allows you to bring together different traditions. They're not all the same. They may not all have the same level of understanding, but you can talk about them all as fitting within certain basic philosophical categories. On the other hand, tribal monotheism is not based on philosophy. The psychology is tribal, and generally the main theological claims come not from philosophy, but from unique historical events. Just like, for example, if you say that Jesus is, I don't know, God, Son of God, whatever church you belong to, but if you say, that no one goes to the Father except through Jesus. Interestingly, the only place in the New Testament that claim is made is in the book of John, which even in ancient times, everyone knew was not historically accurate. But that's another discussion. So the idea here is that, let's say someone believes in Jesus as the way to God, or as God, or whatever they think. So that's a unique historical event. Jesus was born, depending on which gospel you read, either in Nazareth or perhaps in Bethlehem. It's interesting, people say the Bible is infallible, every word, because all the four gospels give different versions of the same story. So if every word in the Bible is true, clearly we have parallel universes. But anyway, so if you believe that Jesus is the way to God, then Jesus appeared at a particular time, roughly the year 0, give or take a few years, and in a particular place. So it's all historically specific. It's at this time and not that time. It's at this place and not that place. And he has a name, Jesus. His name wasn't, Fred or Muhammad. And so, therefore, if your theology is based on a unique historical event, by definition, all other religions are excluded because they don't have that unique historical event. It's unique. Whereas philosophy can be universal. Many different groups can share the same basic philosophical ideas. They may differ on some points, but they'll agree on many other points. But if you have unique historical events that Muhammad appeared in Mecca, or Jesus appeared in Nazareth, or this one or that one, then because these historical events are unique, you can't come together. So that's tribal monotheism, fanatical, world, dividing, if not destroying, fanatical religion. And so, which unsurprisingly came out of a part of the world which tends to be very tribal because of certain, climatological and geographic situations. It's a part of the world which tend to be tribal. And so they impose this tribal psychology on a religion. So, like, take, for example, and this, it's kind of like this crude lack of unifying principles. You see it not only, you see it elsewhere. For example, take the notion of creation ex nihilo. Ex nihilo in Latin means from nothing. Nihilo is like in the word annihilate, to annihilate, like to annihilate. And so I explained this in, what language was that? Is it Portuguese or Spanish? Can't remember. Gave a class the other day. Anyway, I was explaining that if you believe that you were just created in this life, you don't have a previous life, there's no karma and so on, what that means is, practically, that ontologically, which means the nature of existence, your existence is radically different or fundamentally different from God's existence. Because as we know, God has always existed and always will exist. But you didn't always exist on this version. You just came into being right now. And therefore, you're, in a very fundamental way, you're not like God. And this separation from God, I just heard one religious leader on YouTube saying, in a debate against an atheist, saying, well, because some atheist wrote an idiotic book called God is Not Great. And so he said, we agree God is not great because great is like a human adjective, and we don't know what God is because God is beyond human understanding. So therefore, if you say God is great, you're bringing him down to the level of human understanding. I thought this was remarkably unintelligent, I have to say, because the real fact is that we are not bringing God down, we are being elevated. We are eternal souls, and in human life, if we play our cards right, sort of that, great poker game of life, if we have a bona fide process to approach God, we're not bringing God down to human terminology. We are being elevated to spiritual understanding because we're eternal souls. But in any case, this radical separation, if you look at these religions, they tend to radically separate. In fact, even if you look at Christianity, you have, God, who the heck, what is God? Everything is about Jesus. And you just say, okay, that's nice, but let's just put that aside for now and let's talk about the nature of God. Who has a clue? God the Father, but that's about it. There's really no description of God. It's not, if you think about it, it's just like God's almost like a placeholder. It's just a placeholder, God the Father, but no one really knows who the heck that is. And what's the personality of God the Father in Christianity? I haven't got a clue. I've studied it for years, but I haven't got a clue. So in that way, even in Christianity, despite all the intimacy with God the Son, if you're a Trinitarian, despite all the intimacy with, accepting Jesus in your heart, with God the Father, there's like a very, very wide gulf of separation. It's not at all clear who the heck God the Father is. If you wanted to file, I guess, a paternity suit, you wouldn't even know the address. So anyway, so there's this separation that we can't know God, no one has seen God, and so it starts with separating God ontologically from souls, but then the divisions continue. It's this very passionate, it's this passionate theology that divides everything. And even splits God into three, divides us from God, and also divides humans from animals. Humans, like they're very proud, for example, that even if if you know your child's gonna have Down syndrome, abortion is sinful because every human life is like infinitely sacred, and like it's okay. So that if someone, let's say, is using their life just to get drugged and, say rape or cheat or just stay in bed all day, somehow that life is infinitely valuable. It's not clear why that's the case. I suppose if you think this is our only life, then you could say maybe it's infinitely valuable if we have no other life. But if you look at the actual quality of many, I'm not advocating, I don't know, genocide or anything. I'm just saying, though, that if you look at many human lives, it's a real mystery where the great value is. But in any case, so despite that, human beings are radically separated from animals. Radically separated from animals. So, for example, Thomas Aquinas, the great theologian of the Catholic Church, says that animals don't have souls; they're just machines. There's all kind. Animals are machines. So you're, people love their pet dogs. What's it like? Petunia. We've lost her, our little pet poodle. She's part of the family. We love her. If she's missing. She's already missed 3 appointments with her psychiatrist. So, people really. And of course, animals do have souls, but Aquinas says that animals don't have souls the way we do. Now, what's interesting is that doctrine that radically separates humans and animals unwittingly provided a wonderful philosophical foundation for atheistic materialism. the basic claim of atheistic materialism is that you don't need a soul to get life and consciousness. That was Prabhupada's whole point in life comes from life. That without a soul, you don't get life and you don't get consciousness. But the idea that without a soul, you can have life and consciousness comes from the architect of Catholic theology, Thomas Aquinas, who says that animals who are certainly alive and certainly conscious have no souls. So it's ironic that the great theologian of the world's largest religious tradition laid the philosophical groundwork for atheism and materialism. In any case, this separation between religions, Paul, of Tarsus, bragged about the fact that he was violently thrown out of every town he ever walked into because he managed to offend everyone by his fanaticism. And just trashing other religions. So it's like everywhere you see this passion that, our religion is true, your religion is false. Our God is living, your God is dead. Human beings have souls, animals don't have souls. And even separating human beings and God, God is so far away and everything. And so it's all this passionate dividing things at every level, zoologically, ethically, and theologically, just dividing everything up. And this is very typical of the mode of passion. And so you bring this passionate consciousness into, let's say, political or social life, and there are favored races, and there are races unworthy of consideration. The reason that some people don't kill everyone else of another religion today, one of the main reason is because they can't, because it's illegal. So it's this radical separation and this psychology in which you are very comfortable with totally cutting huge portions of the population off from any moral consideration, from any connection with God, whether it's cutting off billions of animals or hundreds of millions of people that belong to a different religion. It's a certain psychology that's very comfortable with dividing the world up and just trashing the part that is in the wrong box. And so I don't mean to say here that certain religions are uniquely able to divide the world up like this. Obviously people can be divided on the grounds of nationalism, on the grounds of racism, but what I'm trying to say is that there is a very fertile, well-seeded, well-cultivated ground beneath us in America for fanaticism, for radically excluding certain groups, for moral consideration. All the neurological wiring is already there. You just have to plug in content. So it can be racial content, it can be ethnic content, political content, and the structures are already there. And of course, then you get the equal and opposite reaction that's called the pendulum effect. One of my favorite all-time people, Galileo. No, just joking. But anyway, Galileo is the one that he sort of coined the phrase pendulum effect, where if you pull a pendulum, say 30 degrees this way, it'll go exactly 30 degrees the other side. This is also Newton's third law of motion. That Newton's third law of motion is that every action produces an equal and opposite reaction. And so you get this pendulum effect, you get this, which is basically the same thing, Newton's third law of motion, and then you get a philosopher, namely Friedrich Hegel, philosopher Hegel, who takes this and he applies it to human history and says, this is how human history works. Human history, what he calls it, the dialectic. Of course, Prabhupada did his spiritual dialectic, but so the dialectic is precisely that every action produces an equal and opposite reaction. So, I mean, Plato talks about this 2,400 years ago, long before Galileo. He says, for example, that anarchy leads to tyranny because one political extreme produces its opposite political extreme. So he says anarchy or democracy leads to tyranny. And so democracy is undoubtedly the best system because you think about everything's been tried in human history, having Shudras make the most important decision is definitely the best way. Anyway, a little facetious there, but so really the solution here is Krishna consciousness or just the mode of goodness. But of course, it's hard to stay in the mode of goodness unless you really have a higher taste there. Because you may be like really, Mr. Nice Guy or Mr. Nice Girl, and you're in the mode of goodness. But if you don't have a higher spiritual taste, you're definitely going to get sucked into all kinds of passionate dualities. And so the problem with political extremism, as we see on the left and right, is that it must, by the laws of nature, whether it's Newton or Galileo or Hegel, by the laws of nature, extremes must create an equal and opposite extreme. An equal and opposite extreme. And so if people go for political extremism, they are actually creating an opposite extremism, which will eventually manifest. And that's why these extremes are not sustainable. 20 minutes left. Okay, I'll need at least 20 minutes to make my pitch for donations and, vote for me, for Guru most likely to succeed and all that. Okay, maybe I'll save that for the end. So anyway, who's that young lady there? That's Amrita Keli's place. Hare Krishna, is that your daughter?
Yes, Maharaj, the younger daughter. She's laughing with us at the jokes.
If you laugh at my jokes, you will definitely go back to Godhead.
Now the older one is laughing too, behind the screen.
Oh. So what is her name? What is your daughter's name?
The younger one is Dhanne Gopi.
Oh, and how old?
I'm 8.
Well, thank you for listening. I appreciate it. So, and that's why Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita that one who eats too much or too little, one who sleeps too much or too little cannot practice spiritual life. Because one extreme will generate, by the laws of nature, both, just the laws, either psychological nature or whatever it is, will produce its equal and opposite extreme. That's why political extremes lead to chaos. Because if you have one political extreme, it produces its equal opposite political extreme. The two clash and you get violence, you get conflict, you get chaos. And so it's really, sort of to wrap this up, it is the duty of the Vaishnavas who have this higher knowledge to show people the middle path where you can peacefully, progressively, steadily work toward a better society and a better life for yourself. Because without the mode of goodness, if you think you can get people to see everyone equally, good luck. Good luck. It's not going to happen. Because even the people who are yelling for equality have radically divided the world into good and evil. And so their concept of equality is to radically condemn everyone that disagrees with them. And that's their program to unify the world. In other words, what they really mean is everyone who agrees with me is equal to everyone else that agrees with me. And anyone that doesn't agree with me is just, is evil, and that's their plan to unite the country. So the mode of passion does not unite. It can only divide. If you're going to fight a just war, good. Maybe you need to be a little passionate. Don't go to war just kind of like, burning incense sticks and chanting mantras. If you're, so there are certain situations where you have to, the Kshatriyas, but It's the Brahmins. We're supposed to be the Brahmin class. If America is a headless body, as Prabhupada said, the other bad news is that ISKCON is a disembodied head. You know, we are, because if, you know, the Kshatriyas are the arms and the Vaishyas are the midsection, unless we somehow connect to society, then we just remain this sort of free-floating head. Reminds me of this movie I saw in the 50s, Invaders from Mars. But anyway, won't go into that. It's funny because there was, you know, they used to have local TV stations back in the old days, very low budget. So I think it was Channel 9 or something when I was a kid. One summer, they really had low budgets. And so they played this movie, Invaders from Mars, and I guess they couldn't afford to, like 3 times every afternoon all summer. So I saw it at least 50 times. But anyway, so there was this head that had no arms or legs. But anyway, so if a body becomes decapitated, let's say, the head gets cut off, which could ruin your whole day. But let's say but somehow or other the head is still conscious. Who's going to figure out how to reconnect the body and head? The body's not going to figure it out. The body's stupid. I mean, literally, it's completely, it doesn't, you know, it's the head. The head has to figure it out. So right now we have a headless body and a disembodied head kind of sailing past each other. And so it's the duty of ISKCON to figure out how to reconnect. Because Krishna, all this passion, all this political passion and trashing private property, which is a good way to show equality, right? Equality means that even though you're innocent, I trash your property, and, you know, because I'm showing you what a more ethical society looks like. So all this passion is not going to change anything. All it's doing is just creating an opposite extreme. And it's making some people hate certain groups more than ever. And so the solution is Krishna consciousness, goodness, virtue, spiritual vision. So it's our duty to enlighten this country and every other country. We have a lot of work to do. So maybe I'll stop here, and I want to leave plenty of time for you to make your impractically large donations. You know, don't consider any other duties like family or education or health. Just, you know, send it in. Just a joke. So if you have any questions now, Ananda Leela, who is bravely manning the phone lines or the social media, do you have any questions?
I have a.
Hi, Krishna.
One is how you're saying how, you know, these extremes, this pendulum is extreme. I'm thinking, when you were saying that, I'm thinking how this movement is an extreme. We are totally different than what was here before. You know, we follow these certain rules and stuff. So now what's going to happen? Is there going to be
maybe we should rebrand ourselves as, you know, the spiritual invaders from Mars. Okay, I'm not going to get sectarian here or obnoxious, but the whole point of Krishna West, I can put the applause sign up. Right? I should have, like, you know, buttons like laugh, applause, prompters. I need to have prompters. So anyway, my point is that we are actually not weird. We weirdify ourselves, I think. In other words, like, take our regular principles, which we always think that the world, you know, is shocked and horrified by. Really? First of all, being vegetarian, trendy, if you look at what Prabhupada said about illicit sex, this is one of the well-kept secrets, you know, although Prabhupada said it many times. If you look at all Prabhupada's statements on illicit sex, he gives a high and low definition. So there is, you know, there's the entry level, and then there's a level for more advanced devotees. Prabhupada said many times many times, and in fact, Nanda Leela, if you want, you can write to her, and for a very reasonable fee, she will send you this information. That's a joke. So Prabhupada said many times that illicit sex is sex outside of marriage. And when someone said, well, Prabhupada, but people, even in marriage, you're saying, like, are you serious? Most people. And so obviously, if someone is spiritually advanced, then they will restrict sex in marriage for procreation. That is an advanced stage for someone who's a mature, an advanced Vaishnava. But for people in general, illicit sex, and I can prove this because Prabhupada said it many times, means sex outside of marriage. So if we preach marital chastity, be a faithful partner, take vows, be true to your husband, be true to your wife. I don't think, marital fidelity is like a wildly controversial point. I think a lot of people appreciate it. And so there's vegetarianism, there's basically faithful marriage, and then there's gambling. We know it's an addiction. There are 12-step programs for gambling addicts. We know that people in Las Vegas sometimes defecate in the gambling halls because they can't leave the game or the slot machine. And we know that people, destroy their families by spending all the money. So the fact that gambling can become a destructive mental disease is very well known. Everyone knows that. And then what's the fourth one? Oh, intoxication. To say that we don't take drugs, that's going to be like, ooh, you're weird. No. A lot of people respect that. And so, we sort of tell ourselves these little bedtime stories. We don't feel bad that, oh yeah, people aren't joining because of our 4 principles. It's like we tell ourselves these fairy tales. No, because first of all, we don't tell people to give things up. We tell people to try to love Krishna. And if someone does try to love Krishna, they will naturally start to give these things up. In 1972, when I took sannyas, my God, that was 48 years ago. So I took sannyas when I was 1 year old. I was extremely precocious. I had this cute little dunda who's only that big. No, I'm just kidding. I'm actually not. I was a joke. I had the cutest little dunda. Anyway, so in 1972, when I took sannyas, I wrote a letter to Prabhupada telling him that I was going to travel and preach at the American universities. And Prabhupada wrote back to me and said, do not present Krishna consciousness as a bunch of rules and regulations. It's the most sublime philosophy. As I say, if you grow, then you outgrow. If you grow, you outgrow. And so we're not pushing rules. We're pushing the beauty of Krishna. A devotee wrote a letter to Prabhupada because I saw the answer when it came. And he said, Prabhupada, please give us a secret weapon for our preaching. Prabhupada said, your secret weapon is Krishna's beauty. And so if we do everything humanly possible to preserve all of our basic principles and yet make ourselves kind of like relatable, it's not a problem. There are 3 things, according to my analysis, there are 3 things that Prabhupada absolutely did not want us to change. Because you find statements from Prabhupada like, don't change anything, and you find many statements from Prabhupada, change everything, or adjust everything. And so what did he mean? The 3 things, in my view, that you cannot change are our philosophy, can't change our philosophy, our spiritual practice, sadhana, you can't change our spiritual practice, and number 3, our institutional framework. Prabhupada wanted us to work in his movement called ISKCON. Those are the 3 things you can't change. Rupa Goswami makes this distinction in chapter 6 of the Nectar Devotion. There are basic principles you cannot change, and there are details that you should adjust. Otherwise, you'll be irrelevant. Whether you are a very large, hairy mammal or a religious movement, you will go extinct if you don't adapt to your environment. And so if we confuse, if we think a detail, which is variable and has to be adjusted, is a basic principle, we didn't understand the spiritual science. Or if we think that a basic principle is a detail, that's also a disaster. So my advice is, beware of free advice, but my advice is that if
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Have a very nice night. And thanks again for everything.
Oh, Hare Krishna. Thank you. So just to finish the sentence, another satisfied customer. So if we, obviously we must preserve our philosophy, can't change our philosophy, we must preserve Prabhupada's basic sadhana, serve Prabhupada's mission ISKCON as far as external details. If you study the actual history of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, it's a history of adaptation. It's a history of adaptation. In fact, the original adapter is Krishna himself. In the prayers of Queen Kunti, she says about Krishna that when you come to this world, you come nato natya dharo jata. You come like an actor in costume. In other words, you adjust. Lord, in the Bhagavatam, Jiva Goswami, our greatest philosopher, Prabhupada said, explains in his Tattva Sandarbha that our most important source of spiritual knowledge is the Bhagavatam. Compared to all the other Vedas, compared to our senses, compared to human reasoning, our most important source of spiritual knowledge is the Bhagavatam. And yet the Bhagavatam says that a sannyasi or brahmachari, they have two dress options, both of which are interesting. One is to wear deerskin. And I went to Amazon, I couldn't find any synthetic deerskin, but actually what's interesting is that Lord Chaitanya forbade his followers to wear deerskin. It says in the Bhagavatam to wear deerskin, and yet Lord Chaitanya forbade it. So what's going on? And the other option, by the way, for sannyasis is to go naked, which, I won't, obviously, no. So, but that's what the Bhagavatam says. So Lord Chaitanya didn't follow the Bhagavatam. Why? Because it was a detail, not a basic principle. So Lord Chaitanya himself shows the example that details are variable, they're not always required, but keep the basics. If you look at Lord Chaitanya, he follows all the basic principles of the Bhagavatam, and basic principles are called Siddhanta, fundamental philosophical principles. And then what did Bhakti Siddhanta do? Bhakti Siddhanta and Prabhupada, they didn't follow Lord Chaitanya in that superficial detail. Bhakti Siddhanta adopted a Muslim shirt called a kurta. That's a Muslim word. And he used the sannyas dhoti that was being used by the Ramakrishna mission. Why? It was the rage in India, for sadhus. It was like the latest sadhu fashions. And so he wanted to fit in, so he used that. So you have the Bhagavatam telling you how to dress. Lord Chaitanya says, no. And then Bhakti Siddhanta and Prabhupada say, we're not going to dress like Lord Chaitanya. Prabhupada once said to me in Vrindavan, it was the Mayapur Vrindavan festival, must have been around 1973, maybe 1974. And so we were in Vrindavan. I went to say goodbye to Prabhupada because I was flying back to the West. And so he just said to me, do you know that song, Bande Rupa Sanatana, the six Goswamis? And I said, yes, because I always loved that song. And Prabhupada said, the six Goswamis were the ideal Vaishnav sannyasis. If you want to understand Vaishnav sannyas, study that song. And yet in that song, it said about the six Goswamis, Kopina Kantasrito. They wore kopines and rags. But we don't, Prabhupada said, study that song, see what ideal sannyas is, and yet he would not allow us to actually follow that detail because that detail is not relevant to us today. And so if we don't distinguish between devotional details and principles, we are not going to present a spiritual science. Let's say we need a bridge to save our lives. We have to, build a bridge. And there is obviously an engineering science, but let's say we don't have any engineers. And so we can't build the bridge. Now, the fact that an engineering science exists is not going to help us if we don't have an engineer. So Prabhupada gave us a spiritual science, but if we are not spiritual scientists, if we confuse basic principles with details, if we get all hung up in things which are not fundamental, and because of that lose our ability to adjust to the historical time we're in, and we cannot really not integrate in society in the sense of adopting sinful practices, but just be accepted by society so that we can teach them, then we are in real danger. We have a serious historical problem. And so that's what I've been trying to do. If you are a trained academic historian, then you know that, just kidding. Then you know that it's just like if you're a geologist and you look at some rocks, you see things that others don't see. So certain things move in geological time. Certain things move at, say, political news cycles. Things move in different time frames. And so in terms of historical time, ISKCON is in serious trouble. And as the Romans said, don't kill the messenger. I'm not attacking ISKCON. I'm trying to alert ISKCON that there are major historical problems. Because if you sort of compute the current trajectory of where ISKCON is going, Prabhupada's dream of a truly international movement, Prabhupada put in his pranam mantra, Paschatya Deshatarne, half of Prabhupada's personal pranam mantra. Also, there's Namam Vishnu Padaya. That's it's very beautiful. It's a standard mantra for all gurus. And then Prabhupada wrote a personal mantra for himself in which he described how he saw himself. And if you look at that mantra, the first part is Namaste Saraswati Devi. He begins by acknowledging, I am the disciple of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. And then what about his message? Gauravani Pracharine. Prabhupada wanted to say, I'm not making this up. This is not my idea. I'm faithfully presenting the teachings of Lord Chaitanya, who's Krishna. So that's the first half of Prabhupada's pranam mantra, who I am, and very basically what I'm doing. And then, what do I believe I'm accomplishing? Paschatya, Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Half the mantra. Delivering the Western countries from impersonalism and voidism. And so, that's Prabhupada's pranam mantra. So, if we can have a little common sense here and not just get all lost in, rah, and just kind of be sober, is it really happening? Have you noticed any Western countries that are being saved lately? If you have, please tell me, because I missed it. So to me, the real way we honor Prabhupada is not just by rituals, although, that's also part of it. We have to perform the puja and everything. I'm not saying we shouldn't do that, but that's not it. Just Prabhupada said, let the neophytes remain in the temples and ring the bells. That's Prabhupada speaking. So if you really want to honor Prabhupada, you have to make this come true. And if you study history, sociology, Shastra, you name it, the idea that we can bring a culture from something which is externally a third world country. We're not talking about what ultimate values are. We're talking about how ordinary human beings perceive things. If you think we can bring an external culture, not the wisdom, that's spiritual science. If you bring science from India or Japan or America or anywhere, science is science. But if you try to, in the ethnic sense, culturally colonize the first world, do not hold your breath, because you will not survive the experience. The idea that we're going to culturally colonize with external culture not spiritual science, external culture. Culturally colonize the Western world, I think, is a tragic misunderstanding of how the real world works. It's a tragic misunderstanding of how the real world functions. For example, if you look at the Indian community, who are just incredibly successful in the West, perhaps the most successful immigrant group, you know, fabulously successful. I mean, people from Indian background were governors of 2 southern states, the head of Microsoft, and not just the, you know, the most visible, millions, you know, practically hundreds of thousands at least of Indians, highly successful in so many different careers. Why? Because with their intelligence, they knew how to fit in. So ironically, we have this extraordinary example of a group of people that came from a very different part of the world with a very different culture, but were very intelligent and became very successful. And so if spiritually, you know, let's say people from a Hindu background come to our temples and we try to teach them about Krishna consciousness, I think if you want to know how to be successful in the real world and how to fit in, we have to learn from them. And so unless we do that, there's real historical danger. There's real, because right now, the senior leaders of ISKCON, the senior gurus, are mostly Western. Within 10 or 20 years, that will be gone forever. And so what extent this movement is actually going to retain its position as a truly international movement. I'm saying these things because Prabhupada said them to me. I'm just repeating to you what Prabhupada told me. Prabhupada, in his talks with me, made it very, very clear. Somehow he trusted me, and somehow he would reveal his mind to me many times, things he didn't always say publicly. And there's no question that Prabhupada, his whole mission was about making this movement successful, especially in America, among, you could say, traditional Americans. His whole global strategy was based on that. He told me that many times. And so we have to find the way to get through to people. We have to find, because the only thing America is going to accept from us is a spiritual science. Science is science. If we try to impose an ethnicity, if we try to, you know, convince people to adopt a new ethnic tradition, it's a tragic misunderstanding of how the real world works. So that's my appeal. I mean, you're all intelligent, you're all good devotees, and I'm not telling you, you know, do this, do that. I'm just saying that we need to address this historical crisis, because it is a crisis. And we need to find, yes.
Maharaj, I have a question. So I like your point that unless we are all working on the soul platform, we cannot really sing Kumbaya and be like one, you know, one group, like you said, you know, although we'd like to think so, because on the external platform, you really never can be one unless you kind of understand that we are all one on the soul platform. I like that point very much that you made. But you mentioned the 2 governors, you know, they converted to Christianity, and that is one of the reasons they became so successful. And that's not
Very
exactly
true. Very true.
our goal.
No, very true. That's very true. That's a good point. But I will respond by saying that if nothing else, it shows that there was not, at least in their states, there was not a racial impediment. And obviously, we're not going to convert to Christianity. I mean,
but that's true, because the Christians almost feel like, oh, we got these people on our side, so to speak, and they're almost even, you know, appreciated and accepted even more. So
okay,
you know,
but those are good.
And these are Christian states, so to speak. They're like kind
true.
of.
However, but, okay, what I would argue here, I like this. Good. These are good points. This is fun now. Now we're doing a little tennis here. So my argument would be, Wong. You know, so my argument would be that the principle I enunciated still holds. Because let's say you take a place like South Carolina, which, by the way, when the devotees did Padayatra many years ago in America, they said the nicest people were in South Carolina, which, you know, you didn't see that one coming. And so in terms of, and the Padayatris were, you know, they're wearing the Indian clothes and everything. And some people were really nice. But the general sociological principle I stated, or so, which I'll put it now in more general terms, or socio-psychological principle, is that the more you make people comfortable, the more you make people comfortable on the surface, let's say, because people are extremely superficial nowadays. So the more you make people comfortable on that level, the more you can deal with them, the more chance you have of persuading them of something. Now, if you want to be elected, obviously you need over 50% of the vote. So I would say if you look at proportions, ratios here, we're not talking about, let's say, in the near future, getting over 50% of the people in South Carolina to become Hare Krishna devotees. However, as Prabhupada said, even if we get 5%, if we get 3%, if we got 1%, if we got 1% of the people in this country to become sort of like out of the closet, active Hare Krishnas, we're talking about 3.3 million people. No, 1%, yeah, 3.3 million people. So, I mean, that's a lot. If we got 2%, that's, you know, almost 7 million people. Oh my God, you could never go to a shopping center without getting literally like harassed by Sankirtan devotees. But anyway, so, but the point here is that, so the ratios here, or the math here is that, you know, what are you trying to convince people of? What's your target audience? Now in America, there are hundreds of millions of people who are not fanatical Christians, huge numbers of them. That's what all the statistics show. Even the Southern Baptist Convention is rapidly losing membership. There's a major generational divide even among Southern Baptists, because the parents are like, you know, kill the gays and, you know, the role of women and all this stuff, whereas their children look at it differently, and they're not retaining their own children, and they're losing membership. So this country is opening wider and wider, and the more we fit in, I mean, obviously things like who do we worship? We worship Krishna. We can't compromise on that. And so if you just look at the list of things that we cannot compromise on, absolutely, you know, we're going to chant Hare Krishna, we're going to teach certain things. And so therefore, we don't have any weirdness capital, extra weirdness capital to spend. What I mean is it's what I call the weirdness quota. You know, if you meet somebody and you like them in certain ways, but in some ways are a little weird, then you may tolerate it, or okay, maybe, you know, okay, maybe we can be friends. But people cross a line where it's too much weirdness, then no, you can't have my phone number. No, you can't have my, you know, my email address. No, I don't really think I want to see you again. So it's like they've used up their weirdness quota. So what I'm saying is certain things, the things we absolutely cannot change, that we worship Krishna, and that, you know, and a list of other things, that's already a lot for people to swallow. We haven't got like, okay, you know, we just explained our philosophy and principles. We still got a lot more weirdness to go. So we can also dress in very exotic ways, and we can do other exotic things. No, I'm saying we should do everything humanly possible to fit in. And of course, we can't change our basics. That we can't change. And so if we do that, I think there's a direct proportion that the more we fit in, the more we'll get people. We're not going to be elected governor anytime soon, but we will make a lot more devotees. And that's already happening. For example, we have very Krishna West boos or cheer. You can, I guess we give people the freedom to boo or cheer. But anyway, we have centers in Latin America, down in Argentina and in Brazil and in Chile, which you tend to find the more European parts of land. Anyway, we're making lots of devotees, and they're all professional, they're educated, and I don't mean this in any disparaging way, but a lot more devotees than most of the conventional temples now. So it's not we haven't been elected governor, of any states in these countries, but because we are much more relatable, we're attracting a lot of people, all from educated professional classes. And the same is going to elsewhere. If you look at America, for example, at the movements that are really attracting people, like the Mantra House in Los Angeles or other things, they're programs that tend to make Western people more comfortable, at least in superficial external things. So yeah, I mean, you made a good point, but I think still the basic principle holds. The more people can feel comfortable, the more they can identify with us, the easier it is to, give them the medicine.
But can't you kind of have best of both worlds?
Can't you find what?
The best of both worlds, like am I sounding bad? Is it me?
No, you're on key.
Okay. In your professional life, you could, like Tulsi Gabbard is a good example. I mean, she's a, congressional representative, and she wears Western clothes wherever she's going, but I think she still follows the traditional attire also.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
you can have like a balance of both, so to speak.
Although I would say this, first of all, I completely respect everyone's right to practice Krishna consciousness in the way they want. If someone, feels more comfortable, let's say with Indian external culture, that's their right. We don't fight with people over that. I'm simply saying though, that it's not just a question of, it's not a bridge. It's not a bridge. It's like what that ends up being what the politicians call the bridge to nowhere. What I'm saying is that if we want to attract and retain a significant number of educated Western people, the kind of people who can really do something for this movement, our message is you can become interested, you can participate, you can join the Hare Krishna movement, you can advance and go back to Godhead, and you never, at no point, do you have to change your ethnic orientation, because there's nothing intrinsically spiritual about these external things. Here's the direct.
I think I know where you're going now. You're talking like the Catholic Church, they accept any ethnicity anywhere as long as they're following their Catholicism principles. I think that's the point you're trying to make, kind of.
Yeah, because why should we care? There's no scriptural evidence. There's no historical, it's what I call, I kind of intentionally use sort of provocative language here, so brace yourself. But it's what I call the myth of Vedic culture. And the reason I use that language is, and you have to explain what I mean by that, is because if you take, there are many words in let's say, in Sanskrit that you can directly translate to English. One word is prakriti, which means nature. That's a direct, perfect translation. Whether it means a person's nature or birds and bees. So prakriti means nature. Ishwara or Isha means Lord. Deva means God. These are direct translations. However, there is no Sanskrit which literally means Vedic culture. There's no Sanskrit in Shastra which directly translates to Vedic culture. So we say, we all say Vedic culture at least like 108 times a day. But the point is, it's not in Shastra. Now, what is in Shastra is a Vedic civilization. For example, Varnashram. You find Varnashram everywhere in the Vedas. It's in the Rig Veda, it's everywhere. Varnashram is everywhere in the Vedas. Krishna Bhakti, as the perfection of the Vedic civilization, is in Shastra. So if you talk about basic Varnashram, which culminates in Krishna Bhakti, that's absolutely in Shastra. But if by culture, like for example, let's say I say Gujarati culture, that means a traditional way of dress, folk festivals, cuisine, architecture. If I say, for example, Oaxacan culture in Mexico or something. So when you use that word a lot of times, it means an ethnic tradition. So in that sense, there's no evidence in the Vedas. There's no evidence that the acharyas are trying to teach us an ethnic tradition, or that there are intrinsically spiritual ethnic traditions.
Yeah, that point I get. Yeah.
There's no evidence, and yet I would say that is one of the most fundamental beliefs of many devotees. That when they go out on the street and they're wearing Indian clothes, it's not even Indian clothes anymore, it's sort of like archaic Indian clothes, but when they go out on the street dressed like that, that somehow they are presenting a master ethnicity, an intrinsically spiritual way of dressing, intrinsically spiritual recipes, and things like that. And there's just no evidence for that. There's no scriptural evidence that, and there's no historical evidence. If you look at India, you know, what today we call India was like Europe. It was many different countries, Maharashtra, you know, Bengal. These are all countries. And even, you know, sometimes they were more than one country. They have their own languages. They have their own alphabets. They have their own cuisines. They have their own dress styles. And they weren't all the same. So the idea of a monolithic, absolute ethnic tradition, which we are preserving, is, I believe, mythological. And Prabhupada himself says this. I mean, Prabhupada, here's a direct quote from Prabhupada: "We do not care about dress. Dress is a dead thing. We are interested in living consciousness." So I think taking on, for the Hare Krishna movement to take on the task of imposing a new ethnic tradition in the Western world is a tragic mistake and makes it
Maharaj,
What's that?
my name is Malati Priya, but I understand that you can tell about common devotees wearing Western clothes in Western countries. That makes sense. But in churches, or you see Pope John Paul, he wears this frock. You know, he doesn't wear jeans or shorts, so he's not judged. So,
Okay.
and Indians don't judge, you know, Indians, so many people, they follow Christianity. So they are not saying, why is Pope John Paul not wearing a dhoti, you know, he's wearing a frock and they still accept him.
Oh, do you have a
Why
camera?
do the higher ups have to change their dress code,
Yeah.
you know?
Okay, I can't, do you have a camera? I can't see you.
All right, let me show you. Yes.
I like your spirit. So anyway, so I'm going to jump on that question or that statement. First, okay, here I have several things to say, but thank you for speaking out on that point. First of all, if you look at Catholic customs, it is true that at their holy service, the priest, and often only the priest, wears special clothes. The people in the congregation don't wear special clothes. So let's say, the actual analogy here would be, if in a Hare Krishna temple, the pujari on the altar doing the puja wears some special priestly garment. That would be the analogy. And secondly, the priestly clothes that the Catholics do use have no historical base. I mean, it's not coming from Jesus, and it's not coming from the early church. It comes centuries, many centuries after Jesus. So there's no possible claim that this is somehow connecting us to an intrinsically spiritual culture that Jesus brought, which of course is absurd.
So, excuse me for this, but let's say if Prabhupada shows up at your door tomorrow, would you be comfortable wearing shorts and t-shirts in front of him? And
thank you for reminding me of the other fallacy you stated. Thank you. I'm really enjoying this. Thank you for I really thank you for bringing these points up. I'm really having a good time. So, what devotees always do, and I mean literally always, is that when I make these points, they compare bananas with electric tractors or something, in the sense that let's compare mangoes with mangoes, or Indian example. In this sense, when, let's say, people wear robes, and by the way, Prabhupada, I have a quote from Prabhupada. I'll send you my paper. Prabhupada says, if I can preach better with Western clothes, I will put on Western clothes. That's a quote from Prabhupada. But if you look at, let's say, the sannyas, kurta, dhoti, and cape, which became popular within the last 100 years among Gaudiya Vaishnavas, it's chaste, it doesn't unnecessarily expose the body. So if you want to make a real comparison, you don't take something appropriate and dignified from India and compare it with something inappropriate and undignified from the West. I learned as a child, not from Prabhupada, but from my mother. I was fortunate, I had very good parents. I learned from my mother and father that when you go to a house of God, which is a term used in the Vedas, Deva Griha, when you go to a house of God, you show respect. Now, clearly, wearing shorts or blue jeans is so informal that forget our specific tradition, just on general cultural grounds, it's disrespectful. So what we really have to compare here is wearing respectful Indian clothes or respectful Western clothes. That's the comparison. Not, you got to compare the same category. And when you do that, here's the Prabhupada story. A real story. It's in one of Satsarupa's little biographies of Prabhupada, that when Prabhupada saw a picture of Balavanta, my friend Balavanta, who was running for mayor of Atlanta back then, and because of Prabhupada's and God We Trust political party, and he saw a picture of Balavanta with a sport coat and a tie, but he had a bead bag and neck beads. Prabhupada said, "This is what I always wanted, that you become known as American Vaishnavas." Prabhupada was asked, this is in Veda base. This is not me. This is not, it's not like I had a dream last night and Prabhupada said it to me. In Veda base, Prabhupada was asked by a devotee, why do we dress this way? Indian clothes. Prabhupada said, because you wanted to. I never said you had to do it. You wanted to do it. Prabhupada personally said to me, I can take a lie detector test. Prabhupada personally said to me in Honolulu, you don't have to wear Indian clothes. Just be a gentleman. Prabhupada often said, my fear was that you would be confused with hippies. I don't want people to think you're hippies. And to understand, a lot of what Prabhupada said, here's another quote from Prabhupada. I can send you my papers. Here's another direct quote from Prabhupada. There is no rule against long hair or beards. But I did not want it because I didn't want the public to think you were hippies. Now, why that concern? To understand this fear Prabhupada had, because from our point of view, as young preachers, we actually wanted the hippies to identify with us because that's where we made a lot of devotees. So when we would go to festivals or political events, we wanted the young people to identify with us. Prabhupada had a mortal fear that the public would think we were hippies. Why? To understand that, you have to understand the history, which these things are not discussed very much, but somehow, anyway. Prabhupada, by the way, Prabhupada's first instruction to me was to get a really good education so I could present Krishna consciousness in a rational way to educated people. If you look at Prabhupada before he came to America, but when Prabhupada is preparing to come to the West, if you look at Prabhupada when he's in America before ISKCON, what is he doing? He's writing letters to the most respectable people, to great foundations, the Carnegie Foundation, the Ford Foundation. Even in India, he's writing letters to world leaders. ISKCON, as it emerged, was plan B. It was not plan A. And you have to understand that to understand Prabhupada. I mean, of course, he was very happy. He loved us and he was, he dedicated himself, gave his life for us. But it was plan B. Plan A, Prabhupada was operating under the principle of yajadacharti sheshtas. Whatever the great people do, the common people will follow. And I think Prabhupada didn't realize, and he used to say these things, he didn't claim he was materially omniscient. Prabhupada didn't realize before he came to America how democratic America was. Because in India, that you have to understand, Prabhupada grew up in an empire. Prabhupada was an imperial British citizen. Prabhupada did not live in a real democracy until he was like in his 50s. Prabhupada was in his 50s before he lived in a democracy. And so Prabhupada's whole culture, his whole understanding of the world was yajadacharti shresas, whatever the great people do, whatever the king or queen does, whatever the leading people do. And that was Prabhupada's vision of how to spread his guru's movement. You appeal to the leaders, the shreshtas. But what he found is, to quote that old Beatles song, no reply. There was just, there was no reply. No one was interested. And then in the meantime, some young people started coming, and Prabhupada realized, okay, this is the plan. He had an idea, didn't work, but this is working. But my point is, regarding dress and all this stuff and saris, is that Prabhupada obviously never gave up his first hope. Prabhupada never gave up the hope that we could someday attract the leading people. And that's why he always told us, he wrote to me personally, he was always saying this, that we have to attract the educated class. We should go to the universities. We should attract the leading people. Prabhupada never gave up his original vision. And that's why he was very concerned. At a certain point, the movement was growing, the Hare Krishna explosion. But I've seen this, Prabhupada said it, this is not my opinion, where Prabhupada was concerned because he said many people are joining this movement, but a lot of them are not Brahmins, they're Shudras. And it was at the time of the Hare Krishna explosion when a lot of Shudras were joining. Nice people and devotees, and they're saintly persons, but vocationally Shudras. Prabhupada started emphasizing Varnashram. Why did Prabhupada start emphasizing Varnashram? He didn't want the Shudras to take over the movement, or even the Vaishyas. And so Prabhupada knew that to really push the Varna system was the best defense against passionate people sort of becoming the leaders of ISKCON and taking over ISKCON. He wanted to reconstitute a Brahmin society. So unless you know all these things that are going on behind the scenes, you don't really understand what's going on. But Prabhupada, to say, these are quotes from Prabhupada. You don't have to wear Indian clothes. We don't care about dress. Dress is a dead thing. If I can spread the movement better with a different dress, I'll do it. As it so turns out, when Prabhupada came in 1965, Krishna himself opened for Prabhupada this amazing, unique historical window where suddenly Indian mysticism was all the rage. The Beatles went to Rishikesh, and Jimi Hendrix put the Vishwarupa on an album. All these cultural icons, everyone had to have a guru. I used to go and sell books in 72 when I took sannyas. We used to sell books at universities. And I remember on the activities board where people put up flyers, half the activities were this guru or that guru. It was a huge, huge fad. And even people who just had, really no spiritual acumen at all, like this Guru Maharaji, he filled the Astrodome. Every Indian guru that had a little bit of moxie or charisma was getting thousands of followers. And so at that time,
Maharaj, can I interrupt with one question?
last point, let me just round out.
Sure.
Yeah. So Prabhupada, having an elderly, saintly guru like Prabhupada, who obviously was spiritual. Prabhupada radiated spirituality. It was palpable. And so having an elderly Indian guru like that was, there was no better strategy to attract followers at that time among young people. Times are radically different now. Prabhupada was a pragmatist. So anyway, Malati Priya, that's your name?
Thank you so much, Maharaj.
No,
I
I really
appreciate your
enjoyed
answer.
it. No, I really appreciate your spirit. Thank you for bringing those points.
Thank you.
Yes, yes. Gita
So,
Mal. Gita
yeah.
Mal.
Yeah, so my question is, and you might have already answered, perhaps because they were young people. You said, why did Srila Prabhupada ask his disciples to wear dhotis and saris at all if dress was not,
Okay. Okay, first of all, okay, 2 points I'll make. Number one, this is a quote from Prabhupada. You wanted to do it. I never said you had to do it. That's a quote from Prabhupada. Secondly, Prabhupada was afraid that people would go back to hippie dress, and third, it was working, because in those days there was this freakiness was all the fashion. So to be weird and freaky meant that you were mainstream among young people, right? And Piari knows that. I mean, he was. I'm sure in your own way you were freaky, and so therefore we were actually, ironically, by being weird and different, we were kind of fitting in. I remember we would go on Harinam. I remember this very well in San Francisco, 1969 and 70. And the younger people were kind of interested, and anyone over 30 thought we were disgusting, thought you're ruining the country. And it was really like that. There was this complete separation. And that's why ISKCON, for all the Hare Krishna explosion, we probably attracted like about 3 mature adults. You remember PRA. It was just, it was Vedic Lord of the Flies. It was just, the temples were just all these young people. We didn't attract mature people. We didn't attract adults. I mean, people who were actually mature. We didn't attract people that had jobs, people that had education, people that, and that was one of the problems of the movement, is that we were totally unable to attract a mature group of people. And therefore there were many excesses in terms of, sort of radical Sankirtan techniques and just all kinds of things happened because it was just basically a young person's movement. So I'm not disputing coming to take me away. I'm not disputing, anyone's right to worship Krishna in a way that they're comfortable with. I'm just saying, though, there are certain laws of nature. The way I put it is, if a karmi, a jnani, a yogi, and a devotee all jump off a cliff, they will all fall exactly at the same speed according to the laws of physics. There are just certain laws of nature. And so if we want to make this, because Prabhupada put that in my heart and my brain, that this is meant to be a powerful mainstream movement, not a little special ethnic specialty item. This is meant to be this movement is meant to change America. And all of the social science, all of the history, all the Vaishnava history tells me that unless we have a course correction, unless we really start focusing on spiritual science and not ethnic details, it will not happen. And, you can say I'm right, you can say I'm wrong, but
I'm not denying, Maharaj, any which way to spread Krishna consciousness is a good thing, so I'm not challenging this.
Yeah, it's like, but history shows certain things work. And it's even working now. What we're seeing is that almost all the successful preaching programs in North America are adopting all or some of these principles that I'm saying.
But the mainstream is also accepting, like the company that I work for, it's an IT company, big insurance company. We have a Diwali program, which is attended by like the highest number of people in the company. And everybody wears saris and, dhotis and everything. And even the white people come into our fashion shows, love to be in the fashion show and, dance and do everything. I mean, it's not exactly a Krishna conscious program, but still what I'm saying is that they're accepting the culture
I would
very
say
heartily and very wonderfully,
Well, I will give a slightly different version of that. Not of the facts. I mean, obviously, the facts. I'm not disputing the facts. But what I would say is that in the West today, or in America today, there are certain cultural spaces which are kind of socially authorized, not legally, like it's respectable or even interesting to participate in those spaces within a certain perimeter. So for example, in America today, if you're an educated person, especially if you work, let's say in IT and you have a lot of Asian coworkers, and you know, like maybe one day a year to kind of participate in their culture, absolutely positive. For example, when I was a little kid in school, because there's a lot of Mexican influence, you know, in Southern California, where I grew up. And so, you know, we made serapes, those little like sort of like Mexican chadors, and we wore the Mexican hats and we learned Mexican dances. No one was going to become a Mexican. No one's going to move to Mexico. No one's going to adopt that as their primary culture. It was just like a little, it was fun, you know, yeah, let's like one day of the year, let's dress like, you know, like traditional Mexican dress. Or you know, like when like politicians go to different countries and they'll wear a shirt from that culture, they're put on a hat. So yeah, that is culturally fine. That's great. However, adopting the culture in a more serious way, making it your primary cultural orientation, is absolutely not happening. And so I think that devotees, frankly, I think we're a little desperate for attention. And so we kind of play up these anecdotal things, and we're not looking at the basic laws of how societies function.
But like Maltipriya says, the Catholic nuns and the priests and all that, they kept up the tradition of wearing a certain uniform.
Yes, however, here's another little fact for your grace. What the statistics are is that today, for every person that joins the Roman Catholic Church in America, 6 people leave. All the studies that they are bleeding members rapidly. In fact, the Roman Catholic Church is becoming more and more a third world church. It's growing in third world countries and shrinking in first world countries. And obviously there's a huge factor of child abuse and all that, but what I'm saying is it's not growing. And another thing is that they don't go out. If you go to a Catholic service and there is a priest that has special clothes, but not the congregation. The standard in many Hare Krishna temples is the congregation is wearing priestly robes. And that, I would say, to most Western people is bizarre. I mean, what would you think? Let's say you went out on the street and there were some Christians singing and dancing and they were dressed like Palestinians from 2,000 years ago. And maybe they had pictures of camels, like we can have, you know, like we have cow protection programs. Maybe they have like camel protection programs. And these are Americans. These are like white Americans. And they're dressed like Palestinians 2,000 years ago. And they actually preach that if you really want to love Jesus, you have to adopt, you know, Middle Eastern culture. What I would think is they're very sincere and extremely eccentric. Let me give you one example, since we're trafficking here in anecdotes. So I'll throw one in. I'm really enjoying this. I mean, it's good you guys are pushing back. I love this. So when I went to Harvard, you know, in the Sanskrit and Indian Studies department, I found out very quickly that the Hare Krishna movement was a big laughing stock in the Harvard Sanskrit and Indian Studies department. It was like a running gag. It's like a running joke. And the devotees, well, of course, a little close to home, you know, actually, PRA is right there in New England. PRA, don't cut it off. So anyway, so when devotees would go to Harvard Square, and you know, they would, at least back then, they would like run around circles and jump up and down and bang on their drums and everything. And it was just like, it was a big joke. And then I went to Harvard in that department, and by Prabhupada's mercy, because Prabhupada blessed me to study Sanskrit when I was young, by Prabhupada's mercy, you know, I knew about as much as the teachers. And so I got I got the fastest doctorate in the history of my department at Harvard. And I got my doctorate in about one half to 1/3 the time of the other students. And so, they respected that. And I would go there. I went there as a devotee. I had neck beads. I had a bead bag. In fact, one of the teachers asked me sort of innocently, I noticed that when the class gets boring, you chant on your beads. But anyway, so I went there as a Vaishnav, neck beads. I had my little shikha and my bead bag. And so the same students were laughing at the Hare Krishna movement. After a short time, they were actually asking me to speak about the movement. I was getting all these invitations. Twice, I had an entire Harvard department, like all the students, graduate students, all the professors, even a few other professor-related departments. Twice, they came out to my house to have prasadam and hang out with devotees and ask questions, a whole Harvard department. I was invited to speak at this Harvard conference. My talk, which by the way, I wrote a paper defending Prabhupada's non-literal translation style. And I explained that actually it's squarely in the Vaishnava tradition, going back to the Bhagavatam. And I proved this, that Prabhupada is actually giving the traditional parampara non-literal translation style. And then Harvard published that. Harvard Press published it. And the last thing Harvard did, go Harvard, be true to your school. So there's this book series called, right? Some loud bragger tries to put me, the Beach Boys. So Harvard has this thing called the Harvard Oriental series, which is one of the most prestigious book series in the world on India and other things in Asia. I mean, in the last 130 years, they published 91 books in the last 130 years. And they just published number 91 just a few months ago, which was my doctoral dissertation. So what I mean to say is that go Harvard. These are the same people who were laughing at the Hare Krishna movement. Laughing, it was a big joke. So what did I do differently? I met them halfway. I went there as a devotee. I used to chant rounds, between classes. I had my kanti mala and all that. Everyone knew who I was. I didn't hide who I was. And yet I met them halfway and I respected their rules and their traditions. And the result was incredible. So, as I say, wake up and smell the kafta. You have to, if we're actually gonna spread this movement, you're not gonna defy the laws of nature. That's not our philosophy. When Rupa Goswami says at the beginning of Nectar Devotion, that when you really surrender to Krishna, become a serious practicing devotee, that you are liberated from your karma, which is true, of course. You are freed from your karma, you are liberated. It doesn't mean you become free from the laws of nature. That's a philosophical misunderstanding. The law of gravity, sociological principles, historical principles. We are not beyond the laws of nature. The laws of nature are the laws of God. And my simple point is that if we continue trying to culturally colonize the Western world, we're going to have a very, very long wait. History has shown over and over and over again it doesn't work. And if you look at the Vaishnava history, it is a history of adapting. What I am trying to do in my own imperfect, arrogant way, the Krishna West, is what Vaishnavas have been doing for thousands of years. The idea that there's one fixed standard ethnicity that comes down through the ages is mythology. Vaishnava history is a history of keeping the basic principles and adapting the details. That's the history of Vaishnavism.
Well, more power to
So
you, Maharaj. I mean, I guess we can do it every which way, Krishna East and Krishna West, whichever way to get people to Krishna consciousness is a great thing, you know. So I'm not,
Yeah.
you know, challenging
Thank
that.
you. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And it's funny because one sannyasi said, yeah, you sort of making a joke out of it, Krishna West. This was years ago. And he said, yeah, why not Krishna North or Krishna South? And my reply was, maybe because there's no such thing as Northern culture or Southern culture. But anyway, so yeah, the two great cultures are Eastern culture and Western culture. And the importance of the West is that Prabhupada's entire global strategy depends on making this work in the West. So there's a huge amount at stake here. This is not a low stakes game. For me, everything is at stake. My entire relationship with Prabhupada, this is what he kept hammering into me. The importance of making this movement work among Americans. And that was his global strategy.
Mm-hmm.
So
I have one last question. I heard that you're translating the Bhagavad Gita. What kind of a translation is this?
Oh, I've already done it. I've already done it. The good news is I published it several years ago. It is, okay, I'll tell you what I did very quickly. First of all, because some of my intellectual, you could say, proclivities are very Western. For example, I really like literal translation. I just really enjoy that. So in the Gita, what I did was, because I love the Gita so much, and I love the Sanskrit of the Gita, which I've been reading for most of my life, I tried to give a translation which is so literal that you could have the experience as close as possible in English that a person that knows Sanskrit would have reading Sanskrit. You get as close as possible to the Sanskrit text for people who don't know Sanskrit. And the second thing I did was, there's like 150 pages of explanation in which I sort of placed on myself a certain, how should I put it, restriction. And that is, rather than doing the normal thing where you quote from all different Puranas and Upanishads and, Bhagavatam, what I did was, and it's not that you have to do this, because the Vaishnava tradition in general does quote from all these different Shastras, because the Vaishnava tradition was preaching to people in India who accepted the authority of all these books. And so in the West, you can't just say, well, look, it says in the Gopal Tapani Upanishad, therefore it's true. In India, that may be a slam dunk, but not in the West. And so therefore, what I took upon myself was the challenge of, I took all the basic words in the Gita, like yoga, bhakti, jnana, buddhi, yagya, just all, a whole list of all the basic terms. And I defined them internally from the Gita itself. Like for each term, I said, I looked at everything Krishna says on the word jnana, everything Krishna says about yagya, everything Krishna says about buddhi, everything Krishna says about dhyana, meditation. And I defined each term based on a literal reading of Krishna's words. And I demonstrated that in the Bhagavad Gita, God has a spiritual body, that God's body is not like the bodies of conditioned souls, which are temporary. And that I proved all the basic, that at least what the attitude I took toward the reader is not, I'm not trying to convert you, but what I will prove to you is that this is what Krishna is really saying. That our understanding of the Gita as Vaishnavas is actually what Krishna is saying. And I proved that internally, just within Krishna's own language. And therefore, if you're attracted to the Gita, if you have faith in the Gita, this is what it actually teaches. So the experience we've had is that people give it, to their friends, to their dentist, to this person, that person. People read it and understand it. And even many devotees. So it's yeah. But wait, buy one today and I will send you anyway, just kidding. So yeah, that was the Gita. Now I'm working on Mahabharata. So Krishna's keeping me out of trouble.
Thank you. Thank you for answering all my questions.
Pleasure.
Maharaj,
It's really a pleasure.
Maharaj,
Yes, please.
my
Who's
name
that?
is Sudhir Devidasi. I'm on a phone call. I'm not visible on the thing.
Go
I
ahead.
would like a copy of your book because I've heard wonderful things, and it said you have to read it with the Bhagavad Gita as it is, and it will clarify things. because I've heard about your book and I would like to get a copy. And the last time you were at our temple, I missed your lecture because I had a baby and I had to go out of the room and I couldn't hear you, but I saw the yajna and the initiation. So I did see you, but I didn't get to hear from you. So this is a nice experience to hear from you.
Thank you very much. You left my class. You left my class just to have a baby?
No, no. When 25 years ago, when you came to our temple, or 24 years, I had a 1-year-old baby, so I couldn't hear your lecture.
Right.
But I did see the yajna and the initiation that Mukunda was getting initiated. So
oh, Mukunda. Is that your son?
Yeah, Mukunda Dev. Yeah, that's when you came to our temple the last
time.
I
remember you very well. It's nice to talk to you.
Yeah, but anyway, Maharaj, I had one clarification that I needed to ask. I mean, I heard all the conversations with all the devotees,
yes.
But I think Prabhupada once said that I understand your principle that we don't have to be identified by our clothes, that we can still be devotees without wearing the clothes that we wear. But I think one place Prabhupada said, when a policeman wears a uniform and a plain clothes policeman, he's still a policeman, but his authority is more visible when he has his uniform on. So we are identified as Hare Krishnas when we are seen with our devotional clothes, that otherwise people would not know that we are Hare Krishnas.
Good point. I want to analyze that because Prabhupada is very interesting. If you look at Prabhupada's life in the biographies, if you look at Prabhupada in India, it was very different because in India, Prabhupada attracted and was dealing with the most important people in the country. I mean, the leading industrialists, leading politicians. And so, whereas in the West, he was dealing with just, young people like ourselves who we didn't know from nothing. So if you look at the conversation, it's a very interesting study. Prabhupada's conversation with disciples in the West and his conversations with his followers in India, who were often leading citizens. In India, the conversations are much more mature. They're much more mature and they're much more interactive in the sense that on Siddhanta, on our spiritual philosophy, there's no question, Prabhupada was the authority. And if these people challenged him, he would, fill them full of lead, so to speak. So, but when it came to practical things like how to dress and what kind of design or articles and back to Godhead, he was very interactive. And Prabhupada would say this, and they would say, no, Prabhupada, you can't do that in India. And so Prabhupada, they would compromise. It was a much more mature adult conversation. Prabhupada did not at all take the position that I'm materially infallible. He absolutely did not take that position. So I'm sorry, forgive me, but you just, what was the point you just made? Just remind me quickly.
No, I said that we can be devotees of Krishna without wearing the dhotis and the saris, but when we wear our dhotis and saris, we identify.
Oh, uniform. Okay, I remember.
Like
yes.
The policeman wearing the uniform.
I remember.
Yeah. Okay. The authority is still the same.
No, I know that. Yeah, I know that. The uniform argument. Thank you. So therefore, in the spirit, because now my body, although I obviously look like I'm, roughly early 40s, but actually my body is 71 years old. It's amazing, how advanced cosmetic surgery is these days. So anyway, at the age of 71, I feel it's, and having served Prabhupada my whole life, I feel it's natural and necessary that I discuss with Prabhupada the way he discussed very happily with senior people that really knew what was going on in India. And I think I really know what's going on in the West. And Prabhupada wanted those kinds of conversations, and he was completely open to them and appreciated them. And so I feel my duty to my spiritual father right now is, it's like, let's say your father owns a store and he's selling a certain product and it's selling really well, then he leaves you the store as an inheritance. Times have changed, the store is going bankrupt, and you say, we've got to put new merchandise on the shelf. No, but Dad didn't sell that. So here's the point. The uniform analogy fails for two reasons, logically, which I will explain. Number one, if you say a policeman or a fireman or something like that, in that example, almost everyone in the society already accepts the authority of the police or the fire department. The uniform doesn't create the authority, it's already a given. Whereas in the case of devotees, in fact, very few Western people accept we are the authorities about God. We are the authorities about spiritual life. And so that's the first huge disanalogy. In the case of firemen or policemen, all you need to know is, for example, let's say there's a fire. Who's the fireman or who's the police? If you feel like that you're in danger and you see a policeman, you rush to the policeman. You just need to know which one it is. In the case of us, people do not just need to know that we're the Hare Krishnas. In fact, they may have the opposite effect. Because people do not, it's not a widespread cultural assumption that we are the authorities on spiritual philosophy. The second disanalogy, major disanalogy, is that even in the case of police or firemen, the uniform is not random. The uniform is specifically tailored, designed to convey authority within a specific cultural context. So, for example, if you look at the Roman legions in that society, red was like this military or conveyed authority, the color red. So you see these pictures of the Romans with their, red plumes and everything. Whereas because of the nature of warfare in modern times, there's a need for camouflage. So camouflage colors, green, brown, or, they're kind of like, or say police wear dark blue. Those are military colors. And they convey the authorized use of force. Like even a fireman, let's say, has to break a window or break a door down or something, or a policeman. So the uniforms are designed, tailored within a specific cultural context. It's not universal. It's a specific cultural context to convey the authorized use of power. Now, what I would say is that within Western culture, dhotis and saris, which, by the way, never in history were Vaishnav dressed. There's absolutely no evidence that a dhoti or a sari was ever specifically Vaishnav dressed rather than just the way Indians dress. But those particular clothes do not convey the right message in Western culture. They do not convey authority. They convey exoticness. Even in India, for example, if a woman wears a sari, it doesn't mean she's a Vaishnavi. May mean she's a Hindu lady. It doesn't mean she's a Vaishnavi. The whole idea of Vaishnav dress is something which was invented within the Hare Krishna movement. In fact, if you look at all the evidence from the Chaitanya Charitamrita, we have zero evidence that when Nimai Pandit in Navadvip inaugurated the Sankirtan movement and took his followers out in the streets of Navadvip, there's absolutely no evidence they wore uniforms. There's absolutely no evidence there was any such thing as a Vaishnav dress. There is no evidence they were dressed differently than everybody else. In fact, the message they sent by their body language, you could say, which I think is the right message, is that we are normal, respectable people who have chosen to chant Hare Krishna. I think that's the right message for America. We are normal, respectable people who have chosen to chant Hare Krishna. So if you consider yourself to be a respectable person, you should try chanting. Because that's what Lord Chaitanya did. And the idea that we have to slavishly follow. Prabhupada, once I was walking with him in 1976, I spent a month with Prabhupada the month before the Mayapur festival in Mayapur. I was just with him hours every day. So every morning we would walk together. I would walk with him on the roof of the Lotus building in Mayapur. And one time Prabhupada said to me, first of all, he was sort of telling me the latest idiotic criticism against himself, from some people in the Gaudiya Math or India. And they were saying that you know, they're criticizing because I fly around the world on jet planes. And so Prabhupada said to me, should I be a fool and imitate Mahaprabhu and just walk, you know, walk everywhere? He said, if I want to sort of, you know, copy that lifestyle, I'd be a fool. If you want to dress like Lord Chaitanya, first of all, we're not, because he wore rags and just, you know, this little gumption and everything. But even if you said you want to be, if you want to dress like Krishna, and why use a computer? So anyway, that's the point. If we want to wear uniforms, I like uniforms. I was a big sports fan when I was a kid. You know, I like uniforms. But the thing is, uniforms work when people are already accepted as authorities. You just need to know who they are, and the uniform is designed to convey authority within a specific cultural context. Our uniforms fail both those tests.
Maharaj, I see when if you wear a dhoti, you wear tilak, sikha, you go out, people, they not necessarily they think you're an authority or a priest, but they think you're from some religious organization, and they have some questions. They approach you. You go out just like everyone else. Nobody comes up and approaches you. So
good point. Thanks for getting in the game, Puri. He just hit one with little curves like tennis, you know.
I controlled my tongue as long as I could.
No, go for it. No, I love it. I mean, it's fun. This is like theology tennis. Okay, so we're having a good time. That's a good point. In fact, here's my answer. I one time heard, I think it was NPR, they were interviewing a priest who said he didn't want to wear his collar because he just wanted to fit in more. And then one time he was out in his collar and some guy came up to him and said, I'm on my way to commit suicide, but I thought I should talk to you first because you're a priest. And he talked the person out of suicide. I agree with you. I agree with you that we should somehow show by our external appearance that we are spiritual teachers, or religious teachers. I totally agree with that. However, it can be done in a way which is much more culturally appropriate. For example, consider the collar. Like a typical priest will wear a pair of pants. It's a big start. If you're a guy and you want to be taken seriously, put on some pants. That's a big start. Anyway, so he has a pair of pants. He has on a regular shirt, not a Muslim shirt, you know, or he has on a regular shirt. And by the way, a lot of people now come to devotees, I've heard this in devotees, and think we're Muslims when we go out with the dhoti and everything. So anyway, you a pair of pants, a shirt, a coat. And so if you look at the collar, it's like, it's in good taste. It's not overstated. It's not shoving something in your face. It's not exotic. It's just a collar. But it says all you need to know. I would say devotees' neck beads, you can't see mine right now, and I will not let you, but I would say like devotee neck beads are culturally equivalent. I think neck beads are the greatest thing since buttered chapatis. Because thank you for laughing at my jokes, that you'll definitely go back to Godhead. So if you wear neck beads, it's clear, you know, you're a Vaishnava. But it's modest, it's in good taste. You're still normal, but you have some indication that you're a Vaishnava. So if I see someone wearing neck beads, let's say, and I don't know the person, they're dressed normally, I'm thinking,
but Maharaj, a lot of hippies and other people wear neck beads these days just as a fashion, you know?
Really? Neck beads? I mean, they wear beads. But
not exactly, yeah, maybe the 3 rounds or whatever, but a lot of young people wear, like, you know, neck beads, like yoga beads, you know?
Okay, then how about neck beads and a big facial tattoo? No, just kidding. So I think what we could do is if we have neck beads, let's say, even if you had, let's say, for example, you had a little pin. I'm not saying we should do this. It's just throwing things out. let's say you wore a little pin on your shirt that had tilak on it, or a chakra, or something which the country gradually came to understand these are Vaishnavas. I personally, I want to advertise Krishna consciousness when I go on the street. I want to remind people of Krishna. I always wear my Jagannath hat, you know, and people like that. So I mean, I definitely want to advertise this movement every time I go out in public. So I'm totally in favor of that. I just want to do it in a way that doesn't make people think we're very, very weird. And that's all. That's all I'm saying. There are appropriate ways to do that. When Bhaktisiddhanta chose a Muslim kurta, it's not because, you know, in the spiritual world, Krishna wears a Muslim shirt. It's because it fit in. So let's find more normal, respectful ways to let people know who we are. That's my point.
I personally can't agree that just wearing neck beads, people are going to come over to you and ask you what religion you are or something like that. You have to have more than neck beads. I agree with the dhoti. I think if you had some yogi pants, it would be a little easier for people to accept.
Okay, let me respond to you. Actually, I'm the proud owner of 4 sets of yogi pants in assorted colors. But okay, I want to respond to your other point. And by the way, if you like the shirt I'm wearing, it's for sale. So I want to do like they do in those bicycle races. I want to sell advertising space on my shirts when I give like Bhagavatam classes. Anyway, so getting to your question, I think that, well, 2 things I can say. Number one, if we went out more and somehow if we were somehow more active out in the Western community, I think people would come to know what that means. If they don't know it now, it's because we haven't really, you know, we haven't really made it clear. But the second thing is, I'll tell you why I think people come up to you. And this is my personal opinion, but I think it's based on some practical observations and human psychology. I think one of the reasons people just come up to you is because they feel, because we're so exotic and they know, like, I'm never going to do this myself. So it's interesting. In other words, like, for example, I was once in an airport, I think in Mexico, flying back to America. And there were these people that got on the plane, obviously from some religious thing. They're in the what do you call it? The waiting area, waiting to board, boarding gate, boarding area. And they were all dressed in white, like shirts and pants, all dressed in white. And so I just went and said, hey, you know, what are you guys and what are you doing? I had no interest in their, you know, joining them. It was just, it was interesting. And so I find, for example, when I was at Harvard, and so, you know, let's open our eyes. Sure, people are coming up to us, but who's joining? When I was at Harvard, there was this girl there, a Japanese girl who was a Buddhist monk. And so we were friends, you know, I mean, I only saw her in classes, never saw her outside the classes, but, you know, she was very friendly and I was friendly. And so we talked a little bit. And she came in her Buddhist robes. And so I noticed I had 2 reactions, and just sort of spontaneous, not thought out ideas, just sort of observing my own spontaneous reactions. One was, I respected her. I knew she was a monk and I respected that. And the second thing was, I was not really that interested in getting to know her because I thought, you're so committed to something that probably we're not going to have a completely, you know, it's like you're already completely committed. To me, it's more interesting to talk to somebody where there's a chance of convincing them or, you know, something's at stake. And so I respect people who wear religious clothes. Like, for example, when I was living in Virginia, by the University of Virginia, there was a Trappist convent near me. And they made this great cheese. You buy these big blocks of cheese and they cost like, I don't know, $18 or something. So I would go over there to buy the cheese and it was $18, you know, and I didn't carry little bills. So I just give them a $20 bill and I just say, keep the change. Because I thought, well, they're nuns. I'm not going to ask a nun for $2 change because I respected the fact that they've given their life to God best they can. And so I had like zero interest in becoming a Trappist monk or something, or really, you know, becoming involved with the nuns, but I just respected them. So I think, yeah, if you go out in religious clothes, you get a certain respect, you get a certain curiosity, but it does not translate into actually growing as a movement.
Yeah, but even curiosity is one of the reasons people become devotees. It's you know, for inquisitiveness. They're just inquisitive, and then they find out some things about it, and they become devotees. It's like
if that were actually happening, you see, I think that this is not a theoretical discussion. I'm talking about the real world, and in the real world, that's not happening. Secondly, when Krishna uses the word jigyasur, it doesn't mean just sort of, you know, curious. Hey, I'm curious. That's not what it means. Prabhupada translates it as curiosity, maybe, the curious, but the word jigyasu means something much more than that. It is a form of the verb, of course, just gya, to know, like jnanam. And it's a form of the word jigyasu, like, which means one who wants to know. And here, what you're trying to know here is God. So if someone comes up to you and says, you know, I really want to know about God, I'm really interested to know about God. Yeah, but if someone's just, hey, why are you dressed that way? Or, you know, what do you guys do? Or what's this all about? That's not what Krishna's talking about.
no, but
And so
he's
what?
interested in God, and they see you, they may approach you.
All I can say is, I think ISKCON lives in this ethereal realm of, you know, ideas, almost like Platonic ideas that somehow aren't really applying to the physical world we live in. And so when we look at, ISKCON, devotees have all these explanations why what we're doing is the best thing to do. It's just that the movement's going nowhere. And the movement's been steadily decreasing for decades. And if you project this out, like what's going to become of the Hare Krishna movement, it's not a pretty picture. So I think devotees live in their own little kind of self-contained world of ideas, of Platonic ideas. And there's just one more thing. I hate to badger you about this, but actually I don't hate it. It's kind of sort of fun to badger you, and that is, I think devotees have a dangerously exaggerated view of Agyata Sukriti. That if people just touch a book, if people just hear the mantra, if it goes in their ear, they just associate with a devotee. Krishna directly speaks against this, by the way, in 1728, last verse of chapter 17, where he says explicitly that if someone is engaged or engages in any type of religious activity and doesn't really believe in what they're doing, it has very little effect in this life or the next. And if you look at all the verses in the Bhagavatam that say that, like Apanat Sangchiting Gorang in the first chapter of the Bhagavatam, one is entangled in the terrible material life. Janama even if unconsciously or unwillingly one chants the holy name, taksadyovi mucheta, one can be liberated immediately. It doesn't say one will be liberated. It says one may be. And if you want to know under what circumstances one actually gets this benefit, you've got to go to chapter 6 of Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna explains why people join the Hare Krishna movement. And Krishna says there that the reason people are just sort of like drawn to Krishna consciousness, not a long, some people, they after years, they study, they test it, they try it. But if someone's just kind of like drawn to the movement as we were, Krishna says it's purvabhya sena tenaiva. It is by their previous practice in another life. And by that alone, he says that they revived the, what's the term he uses? The spiritual knowledge from their previous life. Purvadehikam, from a previous body. So the idea, like people are just going to be drawn to Krishna consciousness, it's not happening. I think if you try to understand ISKCON history in terms of the Gita, you just take the Bhagavad Gita and try to understand ISKCON history, what you have is that Krishna not only created this amazing, unique fad, this interest in Indian mysticism, which never happened before, never happened since, and opened the way for Prabhupada. But at the same time, and Prabhupada himself confirmed this. Prabhupada himself used to say this: Krishna sent past life devotees all over the world, and they heard the Maha Mantra, and they just responded. And what Krishna says is, Hriyate Hyavashopisa. You're just kind of like carried away by it, almost beyond your control. It's like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm joining the Hare Krishna movement. There goes my family. So, you know, it's so that being drawn into the Hare Krishna movement, Krishna says that's because of previous life Krishna consciousness. And what we're finding now is that whereas that used to happen a lot, it doesn't happen anymore, very rarely. And so therefore, the way I understand that according to the Gita, not just, you know, ISKCON, rah, 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 but according to Bhagavad Gita is that we've kind of burned through the inventory of past life devotees. And now we've actually got to go out and do it the normal way, where you make people comfortable and you convince them. So my ideas are based on Shastra, you know, and I just.
So on that note, Maharaj, sorry, I said last question, but.
No, go ahead, go for it.
I lied. So what
the Terminatrix. She lied.
So what's the success of Krishna West? How are you finding success in Krishna West is what I would like to know.
Okay.
What is your strategy? How is it going? How many people are coming? And, you know,
Basically it's a dangerous cult.
Ready?
A dangerous cult based on fanatical worship of me as the leader. That was a joke. It's actually as much as I am. Ever since I was a kid, I always thought when I grew up I want to be a cult leader. No, actually, it's as much as I'm kind of liberal on the external things because Prabhupada authorized it. On the basics, I'm actually very conservative. I'm not into Vastu Shastra, so-called Shastra. I'm not into astrology. I'm not into Hatha Yoga. I mean, it's nice if someone wants to use that. Actually, I believe, for me anyway, for my service, that all the power in preaching is in the Maha Mantra. I have complete faith in the power of the Maha Mantra if it's chanted without offenses and people hear that chanting. And I believe in the power of Bhagavad Gita. And of course, you give people prasadam, which is a timeless way of making friendship. And so in terms of what we actually do, and of course the other devotees, I have disciples doing Krishna West and other people, and you know, they may teach yoga or this or that, but see, the secret of why Krishna West is growing, and it is growing, it's growing very quickly all over the Western world, Latin America, Europe, and not only in programs that have the name Krishna West, but more and more and more and more devotees are adopting this method with success. Because the power is not in the clothes. The power is in Krishna's name. Lord Chaitanya said, Hare Nama, Hare Nama, Hare Nama, Eva Kevalam. Eva Kevalam does not mean only that we don't do other rituals. The power is not in the clothes. It's not if you take a piece of cloth and you fold it this way, it's spiritual, and if you fold it that way, it's material. To me, that's just Harry Potter Vedic culture. The power is in Krishna's name. And the power is in Prabhupada's purity. The power is in the Bhagavad Gita and Krishna's words. That's where the power is. And so, like in Argentina and Chile, it's amazing how many people are coming, educated people, professional people. It's like a Hare Krishna explosion. And other places will. You look at all the programs in North America where they're attracting a lot of Western people, practically in every case, they're adopting, or they already had this style. That's what's working. And I don't want to say fanatical, but I am extremely heavy on the point of not changing Prabhupada's teachings, not changing our basic practice, being within ISKCON. I'm actually extremely, I don't compromise on these points. Another thing is, if I have to say it, that I think is a huge factor is that Krishna West is, we do not allow anything like male chauvinism. And that, you know, half the leaders of Krishna West, at least, are women. They're chaste, powerful Vaishnavis, and they're managing all kinds of programs in Krishna West. They're doing a great job. And we don't, you know, we're not, there's not like affirmative action. We don't like, okay, there's a more qualified man, but we'll put a woman in there because, you know, we're, no. I mean, it's not affirmative action. It's just what Krishna said, Pandita Samadarshana. We're just giving everyone equal opportunity. If you can do the job and you want to do the job, do the job. There's no gender bias. The women are chaste. We basically do not have, you know, fall downs between men and women. The women are chaste. They're mature, intelligent devotees, and they're doing an incredible amount of service. So I think what we've done is, in one sense, is release just a huge reservoir of untapped energy and ability. So this is what people want. I get letters every day. You cannot believe how many people, especially educated people, have come back to ISKCON because of this. I mean, all these letters say that. I now want to again become involved with ISKCON, or I'm in ISKCON, but I'm interested in preaching now because now I see here's a strategy that works. People, I mean, how many times can you go out in the street and dance around and keep telling yourself someday it'll work? I mean, I believe, this is my opinion, that a lot of the Hare Krishna movement is actually demoralized. It's a kind of sort of under the surface depression because, you know, I mean, we're not fools. And when you belong to a movement and you're trying your best and years and years and years go by and it doesn't grow. You know, you can talk all you want about prophecies and Gyata Sukriti, but in fact, I'll tell you why a lot of people, devotees, don't want to get involved actively, because they may not say it, they may not even think it, but it's just like, why bother? It doesn't change anything. If I go on Harinam or don't go on Harinam, if I, you know, sell a book, I mean, it doesn't seem to change very much.
It is growing in India though, but.
Sure, because it's like, yeah, because Indians have, you know, special piety. One time I was with Prabhupada in Mayapur, and I was on the balcony with Prabhupada, that was in '76, and it was Gaur Purnima Day. And there were just like these unlimited people pouring into the Mayapur complex. And I'd never seen so many people in one place since I went to a sold out LA Rams game, you know, NFL. But I mean, this is even more, there's even more people when I was a kid, but just like hundreds of thousands of people. And it was just so inspiring to see that many people coming to take darshan of the Panchatattva. So I went to Prabhupada and on the balcony there, and I just said, India is an amazing place. And so Prabhupada looked at me as if I'd committed the error of damnation by faint praise. You know, it's almost like, is that all you're going to say? So Prabhupada said to me, it is the most important place in the universe. And so, I mean, I personally, by Krishna's mercy, experienced the spiritual world in Vrindavan. I know what these places are, you know, so it's not that, you know, I think it's an ordinary place. And of course, the movement's doing well there because it's Bharat Varsha. But Krishna has created a situation where in order to save this planet, we have to attract the mlechas or convert or change them. And that's why Prabhupada could have said, Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Bharata Desha Tarine, because there is more than enough impersonalism to go around in India. voidism is not kind of so popular anymore, but I mean, you know, in India, there's lots of impersonalism, and there's lots of relativism, like there's so many gods, and there's no gods, and this is God, and that's God. But Prabhupada defined himself as the savior of the Western countries. So there's two possibilities. Either Prabhupada just said that, but it's not really true, and it's not really going to happen, or Prabhupada said that, and we have no other business, those of us who live in the West, than to somehow or other become instruments so that it does come true. It's like Prithu in the 4th canto said, you know, let me do these things and then glorify me. I'm not saying we should stop chanting Prabhupada's pranam mantra. That's not my point. But my point is the way you honor a great personality like Prabhupada is that you show that his words are true. That's how you honor a great personality. And so it's just a fact that it works. It's not that I came up with the idea. Look at history. ISKCON, at least certain wings of it. I mean, they're all sincere devotees. They're all great souls. I'm sure Krishna loves them. I'm sure they love Krishna. I'm sure they'll go back to Godhead. But in practical terms, a lot of ISKCON is trying to do something which I would say goes against the laws of nature and has been shown historically to be virtually impossible. And that is trying to take a culture external, not Mahamantra, not Shastra, not Prabhupada, we're talking about the external ethnic, to take something from a third world country and use it to colonize, culturally colonize the first world. Culture is like water. It flows down, not up. Culture does, I mean, history, all of history shows that culture does not flow up. From a culture that has less prestige, right or wrong, from a culture that has less prestige to a culture that has more prestige. There is basically, you know, roughly speaking, one-way traffic between India and the West, and it's India becoming more and more westernized. Obviously, there are some exceptions, details, but for the most part, it's one-way traffic, and trying to fight that is just futility. It's not working. I believe it'll never work. And so, to me, it's more important to save the planet and more important to honor Prabhupada than to, you know, whatever. To me, that's what matters. That's the way Prabhupada trained me.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Thank you. So I guess maybe we'll end here. Thank you all for listening. I apologize for going so long, but next time, don't wind me up so much. You know, you wind me up, then I... But as a special thanks to Piari, my old friend. I hope we're still friends after this talk. And I'll know if I go to visit him in Connecticut. I'm sorry, we actually have no prasadam in the house, and we're really not going to have any for about a week. But anyway, thank you very much to Piari Mohan and Ananda Leela, who organized all these programs, all the technical part. And she's heard these things a million times, so she must have some really advanced way of tuning me out. I don't know how she can stand to hear it so many times. But anyway, and
I was about to say that the next time you are here, a stack full of buttered chapatis will be waiting for you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now I'm motivated. And your daughter, thank you. What? Tell me your name again. The daughter.
Danya Gopi.
Thank you so much for listening. You were a very, very good girl. So thank you all very much. I appreciate the questions. The tougher they are, the more fun they are. And yeah, so thank you all very, very much. We had some questions. Oh, should I read them very quickly or not? Questions people send in on chat. They're from your group, I think.
Oh.
I'll do it very, very quickly. Prabhupada, no Dodi, don't say you have a nice coat pant. Don't say that you have to. I never said that. You have adopted it. Laughs. I never said that. You put on Dodi.
No. This is just a quote from Vidabase, the one you're talking about.
Oh.
Madhva Kanta that had a question.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Well, the good news is you're not going to hear me anymore. So you're going to be free of all this haranguing and
Anyway, thank you so much for coming. I mean, into our.
yeah. Thank you all very much. I enjoyed all the questions. It was great that you guys asked questions. I think Malati Pri also asked some questions, and appreciate it. I hope to see you again soon, and I wish you all the best.
Yes, we still want you to come and visit once this coronavirus is over.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, right.
Okay. Hare Krishna.
We
Hare
want you to come.
Hare Bol. Thank you.
Oh, thank